Welcome, and tonight, we travel back to a world where mountains were home to immortal gods, forests echoed with unseen spirits, and every river, tree, and stone seemed alive with quiet mystery. This is the world of ancient Greece, where myths were more than simple stories. They were thoughtful attempts to explain why life is beautiful one day, difficult the next, and always filled with questions that never seem to disappear. Among all the tales passed from one generation to another, few have endured as powerfully as the story of Pandora's box. Although, as we'll discover, it was never a box at all. The original Greek storytellers spoke of a large storage jar, the kind that might have stood quietly in the corner of a household, holding grain, oil, or wine. Somewhere along the journey through history, that humble jar became a box, and the new name stayed. Yet whether jar or box, the object has come to symbolize something far larger than itself. This is not simply a story about curiosity, nor is it only an explanation for why sorrow entered the world. It is a tale about choices, consequences, and the strange balance between hardship and hope. It asks why human beings continue to dream even after disappointment, why they keep building after destruction, and why they find reasons to smile despite knowing that life can be uncertain. Our journey begins before Pandora herself ever existed. Long before the first woman opened the mysterious vessel placed in her care, the world belonged almost entirely to the gods. High above the earth stood Mount Olympus, where Zeus ruled alongside a family of powerful immortals. Each god governed a different part of existence: the seas, the harvest, wisdom, music, the forge, and the changing seasons. Their rivalries, friendships, and ambitions shaped the lives of everyone below. At that time, humanity was still young. According to one of the oldest versions of the myth, people lived simple lives, lacking many of the comforts that would later define civilization. Fire, the greatest gift of all, remained the possession of the gods alone. Nights were dark, food was uncooked, and survival depended almost entirely on the generosity of nature. Everything changed because of one titan named Prometheus. Moved by compassion for humanity, Prometheus dared to challenge Zeus himself. He stole fire from the heavens and carried it down to the earth, placing knowledge, warmth, and invention into human hands. It was an act that transformed civilization forever, but it also awakened the anger of the king of the gods. Zeus believed that such defiance could not go unanswered. His response would not come as thunder or flood. Instead, it would arrive in a far quieter form. A single person would be created with extraordinary care, blessed by every Olympian, admired by all who met her, and entrusted with one simple instruction: do not open the jar. It is a warning that feels almost impossible to obey. After all, few things are more difficult to ignore than a secret waiting just beyond a sealed lid. Every passing day invites another question. Every unanswered mystery grows slightly larger. Before long, curiosity begins to whisper more loudly than caution. Whether Pandora acted out of innocence, temptation, or simply the deeply human desire to understand the unknown has been debated for thousands of years. Ancient poets offered one answer. Later philosophers offered another. Artists, writers, and storytellers have continued the conversation ever since. Settle in, get comfortable, and let the distant voices of ancient Greece carry us back to the beginning, where the fate of humanity rested beside a single unopened jar. Long before Pandora's hands rested upon the sealed jar, before Prometheus defied the king of the gods, and before human beings understood both joy and sorrow, the world belonged almost entirely to the immortals. The Greeks imagined the universe as a place where the divine was never far away. Every sunrise marked the passage of the sun god across the heavens. Gentle breezes carried the breath of unseen spirits. Rivers had guardians, forests sheltered mysterious beings, and the sea itself answered to a powerful ruler. To live in such a world was to believe that nature was never empty. Every corner of the landscape possessed a story, and every story traced its roots back to the gods. High above this living world stood Mount Olympus. Rising above the clouds, its summit was said to remain untouched by storms or snow. Mortal travelers could climb many mountains, but Olympus belonged to another realm entirely. It was described not simply as a lofty peak, but as a place where time flowed differently, where feasts never ended, and where the worries of ordinary life could not reach. Here lived the 12 Olympian gods, each with their own responsibilities, personalities, and ambitions. Zeus ruled as king, wielding thunder as both weapon and symbol of authority. His queen, Hera, watched over marriage and family. Poseidon governed the seas with his great trident, while Demeter ensured that crops continued to grow with the changing seasons. Athena represented wisdom and careful judgment. Apollo inspired music and healing. Artemis protected wild places, and Hephaestus labored tirelessly within his celestial forge. Around them gathered many other gods, goddesses, nymphs, and lesser divine beings whose lives intertwined in countless myths. Although they were immortal, the Olympians were far from perfect. They celebrated victories, argued with one another, formed unlikely friendships, and occasionally held lasting grudges. Their emotions were often as vivid as those of the humans who would one day worship them. This made their stories memorable, for they reflected familiar feelings while unfolding on an impossibly grand scale. Zeus, above all, believed that order must be preserved. His rule had not come easily. Before the Olympians claimed their shining home, an older generation of divine beings known as the Titans governed the cosmos. After a long and bitter struggle remembered as the Titanomachy, Zeus and his siblings emerged victorious. The defeated Titans were cast into the deep prison of Tartarus, and a new age began. To the ancient Greeks, this victory represented more than the end of a war. It marked the beginning of stability. The heavens, the earth, and the seas each received their proper guardians. The seasons followed one another with dependable rhythm. Stars crossed the night sky in familiar patterns, and the world settled into an ordered existence under Zeus's watchful eye. Yet despite this harmony among the gods, the earth below remained remarkably quiet. There were mountains draped in forests where no villages stood. Rivers wound through empty valleys before reaching untouched coastlines. Herds of animals wandered across wide meadows, while birds nested in ancient trees that had never felt the strike of an axe. The world was rich with beauty, but much of it remained undisturbed by human hands. The earliest people occupied only a small place within this vast landscape. Different Greek traditions describe their origins in different ways, but many agreed that humanity had not yet reached its full potential. Without many of the skills that later generations would take for granted, life was simple and uncertain. Nights were illuminated only by the moon and the stars, and the changing weather often determined whether a day would bring comfort or hardship. The gods observed this young world from Olympus. Sometimes they intervened in mortal affairs, offering guidance or punishment as they saw fit. At other times they remained distant, allowing events below to unfold without interference. The relationship between gods and humans was never entirely predictable, and it was this uncertainty that gave many Greek myths their enduring tension. For now, however, an uneasy balance remained. Olympus stood secure above the clouds, the natural world followed its ancient rhythms, and humanity continued its quiet existence beneath the gaze of the immortals. It was a peaceful order, but not an unchanging one. Among the divine beings was a titan whose compassion for humankind would soon alter the course of history. His name was Prometheus, and unlike many who looked upon mortals with indifference, he saw not weakness, but possibility. His decision would challenge the authority of Zeus himself, setting into motion a chain of events that would eventually lead to the creation of Pandora and the opening of the mysterious jar that has echoed through history ever since. Among the many ancient beings who witnessed the new age of Olympus, few stood apart quite like Prometheus. He was one of the Titans, born long before Zeus established his rule. Unlike many of his kin, however, Prometheus had chosen not to oppose the Olympians when they rose to power. His name, often translated as forethought, reflected a mind that looked beyond the present moment. He preferred careful planning to sudden action, patience to pride, and quiet observation to displays of strength. While other immortals turned their attention toward the affairs of the gods, Prometheus found himself drawn to the lives unfolding below. The earliest humans fascinated him. They possessed no divine powers and would never enjoy immortality, yet they carried something unique. They could learn. They could adapt. Given enough time, they could transform the world around them in ways that even the gods could not always predict. Some ancient traditions tell that Prometheus himself shaped humanity from clay gathered from the earth. Kneeling beside a riverbank, he carefully formed figures that resembled the gods, though far smaller and far more fragile. Athena, goddess of wisdom, was then said to have breathed life into these silent forms, allowing them to stand, breathe, and take their first uncertain steps. Other versions of the myth describe humanity's creation differently, but nearly every tradition agrees on one point. Prometheus became their greatest champion. He watched as people struggled through cold nights beneath open skies. They searched for food with simple tools fashioned from sticks and stone. They found shelter in caves or beneath rocky cliffs, always mindful of predators that prowled after sunset. Every passing season demanded new skills, and every winter tested their endurance. To the gods, these hardships may have seemed ordinary. Mortals lived difficult lives because they were mortal. Such was the natural order. Prometheus saw something else. He believed hardship could teach valuable lessons, but only if people possessed the means to overcome it. Without knowledge, they remained trapped by fear. Without opportunity, they could never discover what they were capable of becoming. So he quietly began helping them. The myths speak of Prometheus offering guidance rather than miracles. He showed people how to recognize the changing seasons, when to sow seeds, and how to build simple shelters against the rain. He encouraged them to observe the stars overhead, noticing that they moved in reliable patterns across the night sky. Rivers flooded and receded with familiar rhythms. Plants returned each spring after winter's sleep. Nature, he believed, followed rules that careful minds could learn. These lessons did not remove every hardship, but they gave humanity confidence. Instead of merely surviving from one day to the next, people slowly began preparing for the future. As villages grew, so did their curiosity. Children asked questions their parents could not answer. Craftsmen experimented with new ways to shape stone and wood. Hunters learned from every successful journey, sharing their knowledge with others. Each discovery led naturally to another. Prometheus watched these small achievements with quiet satisfaction. He understood that wisdom rarely arrived all at once. It accumulated little by little, like water filling a patient stream. Yet despite all they had learned, one obstacle remained impossible to overcome. When darkness settled across the land, human activity nearly ceased. The stars provided beauty but little warmth. Cold winds swept through valleys after sunset, and shadows concealed dangers that daylight easily revealed. Meals had to be eaten as they were found, and many foods remained difficult or even unsafe to consume. High above, on Olympus, the gods possessed a gift that changed everything. Fire glowed within their halls. It illuminated feasts, warmed their homes, and fueled the great forge of Hephaestus, where marvelous weapons and intricate works of art were crafted. Fire represented far more than heat. It was invention, craftsmanship, and progress itself. Zeus had forbidden mortals from possessing this divine flame. Perhaps he believed humanity was not yet ready for such power. Perhaps he feared that knowledge would make them too independent. Ancient poets offered different reasons, but the command itself remained clear. The fire of the gods was not meant for human hands. Prometheus looked upon the flickering light of Olympus and then down toward the darkened earth below. He saw families gathering together as night fell, waiting helplessly for dawn before work could begin again. He imagined what even a single spark might change. Food could be cooked. Wild animals could be driven away. Metal, one day, might even bend beneath skilled hands. Entire civilizations could grow from a gift no larger than a glowing ember. The idea settled quietly in his mind. It was bold, dangerous, and certain to anger Zeus. But once the thought had taken root, it refused to leave. Before long, Prometheus would make a choice that neither gods nor humans could ever undo, and with one act of defiance, the balance between Olympus and the mortal world would change forever. Once Prometheus had made his decision, there could be no turning back. The thought stayed with him wherever he wandered. As he looked across the earth, he imagined not the world as it was, but the world as it might become. He pictured homes that remained warm through winter, meals prepared over gentle flames, and skilled hands shaping materials that had once seemed impossible to master. A single gift, he believed, could unlock countless others. Yet that gift remained beyond the reach of every mortal. The sacred fire belonged to Olympus alone. The ancient poets tell the story in different ways, each adding its own details. In one telling, Prometheus climbed quietly toward the dwelling place of the gods while Olympus was occupied with its timeless routines. The halls echoed with conversation, music drifted through the air, and the great forge of Hephaestus glowed with intense heat. Molten metal shimmered beneath the hammer of the divine craftsman, sending showers of golden sparks into the darkness. Prometheus waited patiently. Then, with careful hands, he reached toward the sacred flame. Rather than carrying an open torch that might easily betray him, he concealed a single glowing ember inside the hollow stalk of a giant fennel plant. The dry stem protected the spark from the wind while hiding its light from watchful eyes. It was a simple solution, fitting for a titan who valued cleverness more than force. Holding the hidden ember, Prometheus descended from Olympus. Down rocky slopes and across quiet valleys, he traveled until he reached the world of mortals once more. There, for the first time, the fire of the gods was placed into human hands. The change was not immediate, nor did it transform the world overnight. Instead, it spread slowly, one hearth at a time. Families gathered around small flames that pushed back the darkness. They discovered that food changed when it met the fire, becoming softer, safer, and easier to preserve. Clay hardened into durable pottery inside simple kilns. Wooden tools became stronger when carefully shaped with heat. Smoke rising from evening fires became a familiar sight above growing settlements. The gift offered more than warmth. It extended the day itself. People no longer hurried to finish every task before sunset. Stories could be shared long after darkness covered the land. Elders passed their knowledge to younger generations while flames flickered gently between them. Songs echoed beneath the stars, and communities grew stronger simply because they could remain together after nightfall. Over time, fire encouraged new discoveries. Hunters fashioned sturdier spear points. Builders learned to strengthen wooden beams. Travelers carried small embers with them, allowing distant journeys that had once seemed impossible. As each generation learned something new, it added another stone to the growing foundation of civilization. To the ancient Greeks, fire represented far more than burning wood. It symbolized knowledge itself. Like wisdom, fire had to be handled with care. It could provide comfort or cause destruction. It demanded responsibility from those who possessed it. In many ways, the story suggests that every important discovery carries this same balance. Great gifts bring great possibilities, but they also require sound judgment. Prometheus understood this better than anyone. He had not given humanity an easy life. He had given them the chance to shape their own future. For a brief time, he allowed himself to watch from a distance. Children laughed beside glowing campfires. Craftsmen experimented with unfamiliar techniques. Farmers found new ways to prepare the land. Across the countryside, tiny points of light began appearing after sunset like new stars scattered across the earth. It was a quiet triumph, but nothing that happened on earth escaped the notice of Olympus for long. Zeus soon realized that mortals possessed something he had never granted them. The fire burning in their villages was no ordinary flame. It was the same divine fire that illuminated the halls of the gods. Someone had ignored his command, crossed the boundary between the mortal and the divine, and altered the order he had carefully established. There was little doubt about who was responsible. Prometheus had not acted out of greed or ambition. He had acted out of compassion. Yet to Zeus, the reason mattered far less than the act itself. The king of the gods had been challenged openly, and if such defiance went unanswered, what authority would remain? Other gods might question his rule. Mortals might begin believing they could claim whatever had once belonged only to Olympus. As the fires continued to burn across the earth, Zeus's anger grew hotter still. The punishment he imagined would reach far beyond Prometheus alone. It would touch every generation that followed, arriving not with thunder or lightning, but in a form no one expected. And so, while humanity celebrated its remarkable new gift, the first threads of Pandora's story were already beginning to weave themselves together. For a time, the world below Olympus seemed brighter. The small flames that flickered beside human settlements represented a new beginning. What had once been impossible was now part of everyday life. People no longer feared the coming of night in quite the same way. They gathered around their fires, shared stories beneath the stars, and discovered possibilities that had never existed before. But while humanity celebrated this transformation, the halls of Olympus grew increasingly quiet. Zeus had noticed. The king of the gods had always understood that power was not only found in strength, but also in control. The order of the universe depended on clear boundaries. Gods possessed immortality. Mortals possessed limited lives. The divine knew secrets that humans were never meant to uncover. To Zeus, these differences were what kept the world balanced. Prometheus had crossed that boundary. The stolen fire was not merely a tool. It was a symbol. It represented a piece of the divine world placed into mortal hands without permission. Every flame burning below was a reminder that someone had challenged the authority of Olympus. And that someone was a Titan. Prometheus was not a stranger to Zeus. They had stood on opposite sides during the great conflict between the Titans and the Olympians, yet Prometheus had later become one of the few Titans to support Zeus's new order. He understood the ways of the gods and the consequences of challenging them. Perhaps that was what made his actions feel even more personal. Zeus did not see the theft as a simple act of kindness. He saw it as an act of defiance. If Prometheus could ignore the commands of Olympus, what would prevent others from doing the same? If mortals gained access to the gifts of the gods, Would they continue to respect the distance between themselves and their creators? These questions troubled Zeus. Ancient Greek myths often portray the gods as powerful but deeply human in their emotions. They could be generous and protective, but they could also be proud, jealous, and unforgiving. For Zeus, maintaining order was not only a responsibility, it was a reflection of his position as ruler of all gods and men. He could not allow the challenge to go unanswered. Yet Zeus's response would not be immediate. He was not known for acting without thought. The ruler of Olympus understood that a punishment delivered in anger could fade quickly, but one carefully designed would leave a lasting impression. Prometheus had given humanity a gift. Zeus would give them a lesson. The first punishment was reserved for Prometheus himself. The Titan had used his intelligence against the gods, so Zeus decided that intelligence would not save him from suffering. He ordered that Prometheus be captured and bound to a remote mountain where he would remain separated from both gods and humans. There, according to the myth, an eagle would come each day to consume his liver. Because Prometheus was immortal, the wound would heal overnight, only for the torment to begin again the following day. It was a punishment designed to last forever. But Zeus was not finished. Prometheus had acted because he cared for humanity. He had looked upon mortals and believed they deserved more than the life they had been given. So Zeus turned his attention toward the people who had received the stolen gift. The consequences would not arrive as a storm, a flood, or a great battle. Instead, they would arrive in a form far more subtle. The gods would create something new, a being unlike anything the earth had seen before. Someone who would appear as a blessing, carrying beauty, charm, and countless gifts from Olympus. Yet hidden beneath that beauty would be the punishment Zeus had planned for humanity. This decision marked a turning point. The conflict was no longer only between a titan and a king of gods. It had become a story about all of humanity and the uncertain relationship between mortals and the powers above them. For Zeus, the lesson was clear. Humans had reached beyond their place in the world, and now they would learn that every gift came with a price. Far below Olympus, the fires continued to burn. People still gathered beside their hearths. They still marveled at the warmth and light that Prometheus had given them. They could not yet know that their greatest gift would soon be followed by their greatest trial. And as Zeus looked upon the mortal world, the plan that would become the story of Pandora began to take shape. The punishment Zeus envisioned would not come through force alone. A storm could destroy a village. A weapon could defeat an enemy. But Zeus understood that the most powerful consequences often came in unexpected forms. If Prometheus had used cleverness to challenge the gods, then Zeus would answer with a plan that required equal care and patience. The king of Olympus gathered the gods together and revealed his intention. Humanity had received the gift of fire, but Zeus would ensure that this gift was accompanied by a reminder of their place in the world. The mortals who now carried a piece of divine power would receive something unlike anything they had known before. They would receive a woman. In the earliest Greek traditions, this moment represented the beginning of a new chapter for humanity. Until then, many myths described humans as existing without the same social structures, relationships, and responsibilities that would later define their lives. The arrival of Pandora was not simply the creation of one individual. It marked a transformation in the human experience. To bring her into existence, Zeus turned to Hephaestus, the master craftsman of Olympus. Within his magnificent forge, where rivers of molten metal flowed and divine weapons were created, Hephaestus began his work. The god of craftsmanship was known for creating things that seemed impossible, shields that carried moving scenes, armor worthy of heroes, and objects that combined beauty with extraordinary skill. But this creation would be different. Instead of shaping metal or stone, Hephaestus worked with earth itself. From clay, He formed a figure with the appearance of a mortal woman. Slowly, carefully, the lifeless material took on a human shape. The ancient poets described this creation as both beautiful and mysterious. Pandora was not born like the humans who came before her. She was crafted intentionally, designed by the hands of a god and brought to life through divine power. When Hephaestus finished his work, the other gods gathered to see what had been made. Each one recognized something familiar in her. She possessed the grace of the immortals, yet she belonged to the mortal world. She was not a goddess, but she carried traces of the divine. She existed between two realms, connected to Olympus while destined to walk among humans. Then came the moment when she opened her eyes. The world was entirely new to her. Like a child seeing the earth for the first time, Pandora encountered existence with wonder. The colors of the sky, the movement of the wind, the sound of voices, and the warmth of sunlight were all unfamiliar. She had no memories of childhood, no years of experience behind her, and no understanding of the role she had been created to play. The gods would shape that understanding themselves. One by one, they approached her and offered gifts. These gifts were not ordinary possessions. They were qualities, abilities, and traits that would define how she moved through the world. Beauty, intelligence, charm, and skill were placed upon her by divine hands. Every part of her creation reflected the power of Olympus. Her name would be Pandora, meaning all gifted, or the one who receives all gifts. The name carried a sense of wonder. It suggested abundance, generosity, and blessing. To anyone who saw her, Pandora would appear to be a remarkable gift from the gods. But beneath this beauty was another purpose. Zeus had not created Pandora out of kindness alone. She was part of a carefully designed response to Prometheus. The same humanity that had received fire would now receive something far more complicated, something that would change their lives in ways they could not yet understand. The gods had given Pandora everything she needed to captivate those around her. Yet the greatest mystery of her existence was still waiting. Before she entered the mortal world, Zeus placed a final instruction upon her story. A jar would accompany her. Its contents would remain hidden, and its purpose would remain unknown. Like Pandora herself, the jar would appear ordinary while carrying consequences far beyond what anyone could imagine. For now, however, Pandora stood among the gods of Olympus, surrounded by beauty and admiration. She did not yet know the future that awaited her. She did not know the sorrow that would one day follow her name. She was simply the first of her kind, a creation of earth and divinity, standing at the beginning of a story that would be remembered for thousands of years. And as the gods prepared to send her into the world of mortals, they began giving her the final gifts that would make her truly unforgettable. As Pandora stood among the gods of Olympus, she became something the world had never seen before. She was not created through birth or shaped by the natural passage of time. She was carefully crafted, given form by Hephaestus, and awakened through divine power. Yet her creation was not complete. The gods had made her body, but now they would shape the qualities she would carry into the mortal world. Each god approached Pandora with a gift. These offerings were not simply objects placed into her hands. They were pieces of the divine world itself, traits that would influence how she moved, spoke, and interacted with those around her. Together, these gifts created the person the ancient Greeks would remember as Pandora. The first to offer her blessing was Athena, goddess of wisdom and skilled craftsmanship. Athena was known throughout Greece as a figure of careful thought and intelligence. Unlike the wild power of storms or the unpredictable force of the sea, Athena represented strategy, patience, and the ability to solve problems through knowledge. To Pandora, she gave the skills associated with civilization and creativity, including the art of weaving. In the ancient Greek world, weaving was far more than a simple household task. It represented patience, discipline, and the transformation of raw materials into something meaningful. A single thread, carefully placed beside others, could become a beautiful pattern. In this way, weaving reflected a deeper idea: the ability to create order from chaos. Next came Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty and desire. Her gift was the kind that could capture attention before a single word was spoken. Aphrodite gave Pandora grace, charm, and a beauty unlike anything found among ordinary mortals. Her presence would inspire admiration and fascination wherever she went. To the Greeks, beauty was a powerful force. It could bring joy, inspire art, and create deep connections between people. But beauty could also influence decisions and awaken emotions that were difficult to control. Like many things in mythology, Aphrodite's gift carried both wonder and complexity. Hermes, the messenger of the gods, also offered his contribution. Known for his speed, intelligence, and cleverness, Hermes moved easily between the worlds of gods and humans. He was the guide of travelers, the protector of merchants, and a master of words. From him, Pandora received the ability to communicate, persuade, and navigate the social world. His gift reflected the importance of language. Words could build friendships, resolve conflicts, and share knowledge. But words could also mislead or deceive. Hermes himself was often portrayed as a figure of clever contradictions, someone who understood both honesty and trickery. Other gods and divine beings added their own gifts as well. The Graces brought elegance and beauty. The seasons offered their understanding of nature's rhythms. Each contribution added another layer to Pandora's identity, creating someone who appeared complete in every way. By the time the gods had finished, Pandora represented an extraordinary collection of divine qualities. She carried wisdom, beauty, charm, creativity, and countless other traits. To anyone who encountered her, she would seem like a remarkable blessing from Olympus. And that was precisely what made the plan so effective. Zeus understood that the most powerful gifts are not always recognized as dangers. A storm announces itself with thunder. A weapon reveals its purpose through its sharp edge. But something beautiful and unexpected can be accepted without hesitation. Pandora's appearance and abilities would make her seem like a reward rather than a punishment. This contrast lies at the heart of the myth. Pandora was not created as a monster or an enemy. She was created to be captivating. She possessed qualities that humans would naturally admire, making her arrival seem like an extraordinary honor from the gods. The ancient storytellers did not portray Pandora as evil. She was curious, thoughtful, and human in the ways that mattered most. Her tragedy came not from being wicked, but from being placed at the center of a plan far greater than herself. As the gods completed their work, one final element remained. Pandora needed a place in the mortal world. She needed a companion, a home, and a life beyond the shining halls of Olympus. Soon she would leave behind the gods who created her and step into the world of humans, the very people who had received Prometheus's stolen fire. Waiting for her would be Prometheus, the titan known as Afterthought, whose own story was connected to the warning he had received from his brother Prometheus. And with Pandora's arrival among mortals, the carefully prepared plan of Zeus would finally begin to unfold. For the first time, Pandora stood among beings who were not like her. The halls of Olympus shimmered with the presence of the gods. Golden light filled the great chambers, music drifted through the air, and every corner reflected the beauty of the divine world. To Pandora, everything was unfamiliar. She had no memories of a childhood home, no years of experience to guide her, and no stories from a past life. She existed only in the present moment. Like a newborn discovering the world for the first time, Pandora looked upon everything with curiosity. The movement of the clouds below Olympus, the colors of the sky, the sound of voices, and the warmth of sunlight were all new experiences. Every sensation carried wonder. The gods watched as she learned. Although they had created her for a purpose, Pandora herself did not yet understand that purpose. She was not aware of Zeus's anger toward Prometheus or the role she would play in his response. She did not know that her arrival among humans would become one of the most remembered moments in all of Greek mythology. She was simply Pandora, a person standing at the beginning of her own story. The gods continued preparing her for the world below. They had given her beauty, wisdom, skill, and charm, but they also gave her something perhaps even more important, a sense of identity. She was not merely an object created for a plan. She was someone capable of thought, emotion, and choice. This detail is what has made Pandora such a fascinating figure throughout history. Unlike many creatures from Greek mythology, she was not a monster defeated by a hero or a villain seeking destruction. She was a person placed into a difficult situation, carrying both the gifts and uncertainties that come with being human. Her story would become a reflection of humanity itself, full of curiosity, mistakes, and the search for meaning. As Pandora moved through Olympus, she began to understand the world around her. The gods showed her the wonders of their home, a place untouched by ordinary suffering. She saw halls where immortals gathered, gardens that flourished without decay, and treasures created by divine hands. Yet even surrounded by such perfection, Pandora was not meant to remain there. Her destiny belonged among mortals. The world of humans was very different from Olympus. It was a place where seasons changed, where people aged, where hardship and happiness existed side by side. It was a world filled with uncertainty, but also with possibility. The gods had created Pandora to enter that world. Before she departed, Zeus presented her with the final part of his plan. A large jar was placed in her possession. In ancient Greek tradition, this container was called a pithos, a common type of storage vessel used for holding valuable supplies such as grain, oil, or wine. To those living in the ancient world, such jars were ordinary household objects found in homes throughout Greece. But this jar was different. Its contents were hidden from Pandora. She was not told what rested inside, nor was she given a reason to understand why it mattered. The mystery surrounding it became part of the burden she carried. Zeus gave her a simple instruction. The jar must remain closed. The command itself was uncomplicated, but it carried an unusual weight. Why should something be kept hidden? What secret could be important enough to require such caution? For someone experiencing the world with fresh eyes, unanswered questions naturally created curiosity. Yet at this moment, Pandora had no reason to doubt the gods. They had created her. They had given her gifts. They had welcomed her into their world. She accepted the jar and prepared to leave Olympus. The journey from the heavens to the mortal world marked a transition unlike anything that had happened before. Pandora was moving from the realm of immortals into the lives of ordinary people. She would no longer stand among gods and divine wonders, but among families, villages, and the everyday struggles of humanity. Waiting for her was Prometheus. He was the brother of Prometheus, a titan whose name carried an important meaning. While Prometheus represented forethought, Prometheus represented afterthought, someone who often understood situations only after they had already happened. Long before Pandora arrived, Prometheus had warned his brother, "Do not accept gifts from Zeus." Prometheus knew the king of the gods well. He understood that Zeus's generosity often carried hidden intentions. A gift from Olympus was not always a blessing. But Prometheus, unlike his cautious brother, was not one to dwell on possible dangers. He lived more in the moment, trusting what stood before him rather than worrying about what might come later. Soon he would meet Pandora. Soon he would see the remarkable woman who had been crafted by the gods themselves. And soon, the careful plan of Zeus would move from the halls of Olympus into the quiet world of humanity. The time had come for Pandora to leave the world of the gods behind. The halls of Olympus, with their endless light and immortal beauty, had been the place where she first opened her eyes. There, she had received the gifts that shaped her and learned of the existence she was about to enter. But her story was never meant to remain among the immortals. She was created for the earth below. As Pandora prepared to descend from Olympus, the gods gave her everything she would need for her new life among humans. She carried with her the qualities bestowed by the divine, a beauty that would draw attention, and a presence unlike anyone the mortal world had ever known. But among all that she carried, one object stood apart: the jar. It was not large enough to seem threatening, nor unusual enough to immediately attract suspicion. To an observer, it would have appeared like any other storage vessel found in a household. Ancient Greek homes often contained similar jars, used to store valuable supplies and protect them from the elements. Yet this particular jar carried a secret. Its importance came not from its appearance, but from what it contained. Zeus had made his instructions clear. The jar was not to be opened. He did not offer Pandora an explanation. He did not reveal what waited inside. He simply placed the responsibility in her hands and left the mystery untouched. In many ways, this command was the true beginning of Pandora's trial. A warning without an explanation creates a different kind of challenge. If someone understands a danger, avoiding it is simple. A person who sees a cliff edge knows to step away. Someone who knows a flame will burn knows to be careful. But an unknown secret is different. It invites questions. Why was the jar sealed? Why had it been given to her? What could possibly be hidden inside? Was it something valuable? Something beautiful? Something dangerous? Pandora had been created with curiosity, intelligence, and the desire to understand the world around her. These qualities were gifts, but like many gifts in mythology, they carried complexity. Curiosity allowed people to discover new things, learn, and grow. But curiosity could also lead them toward things they were not prepared to face. The gods knew this. Whether Zeus intended the temptation from the beginning or simply understood human nature, the sealed jar represented a powerful challenge. It was a mystery placed directly in Pandora's path. As Pandora began her journey toward the mortal world, she carried not only the object itself but also the weight of the command surrounding it. Do not open the jar. The words followed her. Below Olympus stretched a world far different from the realm of the gods. The earth was filled with changing seasons, uncertain weather, and the daily struggles of human life. It was a world where people worked for survival and found happiness in small moments. Into this world, Pandora would bring something entirely new. She would not arrive as a conqueror or a ruler. She would arrive as a stranger, entering a society that had never known someone like her. The people she met would see the gifts of Olympus reflected in her, and they would wonder how such a remarkable person had appeared among them. Waiting for her was Prometheus. Unlike his brother Prometheus, who looked ahead and planned carefully, Prometheus often acted according to the moment. His name itself reflected this difference. Where Prometheus represented forethought, Prometheus represented the understanding that sometimes arrives after a decision has already been made. Prometheus had warned him. The Titan knew Zeus's nature. He knew that the ruler of Olympus rarely acted without purpose. A gift from Zeus was not something to accept without thought. But Prometheus did not share his brother's caution. When Pandora arrived, he saw not a hidden danger, but an extraordinary gift. He saw someone beautiful, graceful, and unlike anyone he had ever encountered. The warning from Prometheus faded beneath the wonder of the moment. And so Pandora entered human life. For a while, everything seemed peaceful. The jar remained closed. The gods' plan waited quietly. Pandora began learning about the world around her, and humanity began adjusting to the arrival of someone new. The days passed gently, and the mysterious vessel remained only an object sitting nearby. But the greatest moments in myths often begin quietly. A storm does not always announce itself before arriving. A single choice can change the course of countless lives. And sometimes, the most important things in the world begin with something as simple as a question. What is hidden inside? For now, Pandora resisted the urge to know. For now, the lid remained sealed. But curiosity, once planted, has a way of growing. Far from the shining halls of Olympus, where the gods watched over their carefully arranged plans, there lived a titan who would soon become connected forever with the arrival of Pandora. His name was Prometheus. He was the brother of Prometheus, but in nearly every way that mattered, the two were opposites. Where Prometheus looked ahead and considered every possible consequence, Prometheus often lived in the moment. His name reflected this difference. Prometheus meant forethought, while Prometheus meant afterthought. A person who understood things once events had already unfolded. This did not make Prometheus foolish or uncaring. He was not portrayed as cruel, reckless, or lacking wisdom. Instead, he represented a different part of human nature, the tendency to experience life as it happens, to make choices based on what stands before us, and only later reflect on what those choices might mean. In the quiet world before Pandora's arrival, Prometheus lived a simple existence. Like other titans who survived the great conflict between the old gods and the Olympians, he occupied a place between the ancient and the new. He was not one of the rulers of Olympus, but he was not forgotten either. He belonged to an older generation of beings who had witnessed the world change. His brother Prometheus knew him well. The two titans shared a deep connection, but their differences were impossible to ignore. Prometheus was cautious and thoughtful, always imagining what might happen next. He studied situations before acting and believed preparation was the greatest protection against uncertainty. Prometheus, however, trusted more easily. Where Prometheus saw hidden possibilities, Prometheus saw what was directly in front of him. Where Prometheus questioned the intentions behind every action, Prometheus was more willing to accept things as they appeared. This difference had always existed between them. But now, as Zeus prepared his response to Prometheus's theft of fire, that difference would become more important than ever. Before Pandora was sent into the mortal world, Prometheus went to his brother with a warning. He understood Zeus's anger. He knew that the king of the gods rarely acted without purpose, and he suspected that any gift offered from Olympus carried something hidden beneath its surface. Prometheus urged Prometheus to be careful. Do not accept gifts from Zeus. The warning was simple, but it carried the weight of everything Prometheus had learned about the gods. He had seen their generosity, but he had also witnessed their pride. He knew that immortals could give blessings, but they could also create consequences that lasted for generations. Prometheus listened, but listening was not the same as understanding. The Titan may have respected his brother's concerns, yet he could not fully imagine what danger might come from a gift that appeared so extraordinary. After all, what harm could there be in accepting something beautiful? What reason would anyone have to reject a blessing from the heavens? This was exactly the uncertainty Zeus intended to create. When Pandora finally arrived, she did not come with signs of danger. She did not appear threatening or mysterious. She arrived carrying the qualities the gods had carefully placed within her. She was graceful. She was intelligent. She was unlike anyone Prometheus had ever encountered. The warning from Prometheus faded quickly in the presence of such wonder. To Prometheus, Pandora seemed less like a punishment and more like an incredible gift. She represented something new entering the world, something unexpected and extraordinary. And so, despite his brother's advice, Prometheus welcomed her. The decision was made. The plan of Zeus had moved one step closer to completion. Yet the tragedy of the story was not that Prometheus knowingly chose danger. Like Pandora herself, he was placed in a situation where he could not fully understand what was happening around him. He saw only what was visible. The hidden purpose remained concealed. This is part of what makes the myth so enduring. The characters are not simply divided into heroes and villains. Prometheus acts out of compassion but challenges authority. Zeus seeks to protect his power but creates suffering. Prometheus accepts a gift because it appears wonderful. Pandora herself will soon face a choice without knowing the full consequences. Each figure represents a different aspect of being human: the desire to help, the need for control, the hope for something better, and the curiosity to understand what remains unknown. For a while, life continued peacefully. Pandora and Prometheus began their existence together. The strange jar remained closed. The warnings remained only memories. The mortal world continued its familiar rhythms, unaware that something had changed forever. But the presence of the sealed jar created a quiet tension. It sat nearby, silent and mysterious. And even though Pandora had no reason to open it, no one could completely ignore the pull of something hidden. The gods had created the question. Soon, Pandora would have to decide whether she could live without an answer. For a time, nothing seemed unusual. The world continued as it always had. The sun rose over the fields, rivers followed their ancient paths, and the seasons moved gently from one to the next. The arrival of Pandora did not bring immediate signs of danger. There were no storms across the sky, no warnings from the gods, and no obvious indication that she carried the beginning of a great change. Instead, life moved quietly forward. Pandora settled into the world of humanity, learning the rhythms of mortal existence. Unlike the gods who lived beyond the reach of time, humans measured their lives through ordinary moments. Days were marked by work, meals, conversations, and the changing landscape around them. This was a world of simple pleasures. The warmth of the morning sun, the sound of wind moving through the trees, the gathering of people at the end of the day, the satisfaction of completing a task with one's own hands. These were experiences unknown to the immortals of Olympus, but they formed the foundation of human life. Pandora observed all of this with the curiosity of someone experiencing the world for the first time. Although she had received many gifts from the gods, she still had much to discover. Knowledge was not the same as experience. Being given wisdom did not mean understanding every feeling, every hardship, or every small joy that came with mortal life. She learned by living. She learned the importance of patience from watching the seasons change. She learned the value of companionship from the people around her. She learned that happiness was often found not in extraordinary moments, but in ordinary ones. In time, Pandora and Prometheus built a life together. The Titan who had once lived alone now had someone beside him. The arrival of Pandora brought a new sense of companionship and connection. She was unlike anyone he had known before, and her presence changed the quiet rhythm of his existence. Prometheus did not dwell on the warning his brother had given him. Perhaps he believed Prometheus had been too cautious. Perhaps he trusted that a gift so beautiful could not possibly bring harm. Or perhaps he simply chose to appreciate the life in front of him rather than worry about what might come later. For a while, it seemed that he had made the right choice. Their home was peaceful. The mysterious jar remained untouched. The world carried on. Yet the presence of the sealed vessel created a quiet mystery that could never completely disappear. It stood as a reminder of the gods' involvement, a strange object with an unknown purpose. Pandora knew she had been instructed not to open it, but she had never been told why. The command existed without an explanation, and that unanswered question remained. In many ways, this was the most human part of Pandora's story. The desire to understand is one of humanity's oldest traits. Curiosity has led people to explore distant lands, discover new ideas, and uncover secrets hidden in nature. It has allowed civilizations to grow and knowledge to spread across generations. But curiosity can also create uncertainty. A closed door naturally invites the question of what lies behind it. A forgotten room makes people wonder what has been left inside. A sealed container with no explanation becomes impossible not to notice. Pandora was surrounded by mystery. She had been created with intelligence and awareness. She had been given the ability to think, question, and understand. These qualities made her remarkable, but they also meant she could not simply ignore the unknown forever. Still, for many days, the jar remained closed. Pandora did not immediately give in to temptation. She lived her life, learning about the world and growing familiar with the people around her. The object sat quietly nearby, waiting without movement or sound. Nothing forced her to open it. No voice called from within. No visible sign suggested that anything was hidden there. The danger came only from the question itself. What was inside? The ancient storytellers understood something important about human nature. The greatest challenges are not always obvious. Sometimes they appear as small choices made during ordinary moments. A decision that seems insignificant can eventually shape the future in ways no one expects. Pandora's story was not yet about disaster. It was about uncertainty. It was about living beside something unknown and wondering whether knowledge was worth the risk. Above the earth, the gods watched. Zeus's plan was unfolding exactly as intended. The jar remained where it had been placed. Pandora and Prometheus continued their lives unaware of the forces that had brought them together. But the longer the mystery remained, the more powerful it became. And slowly, quietly, the question that had been planted in Pandora's mind began to grow. What secret could possibly be important enough to hide forever? The answer waited just beneath the lid. The days continued to pass, and for a while, Pandora's life remained peaceful. The world did not change suddenly. There was no dramatic sign that something important was approaching. No voice from Olympus announced what would happen next. No warning appeared in the sky. The greatest turning points in stories are often not marked by great events at first. Sometimes they begin with quiet moments, unnoticed until the consequences arrive. For Pandora, those moments were ordinary. She continued learning what it meant to live among humans. She watched the changing seasons, listened to the stories of those around her, and discovered the many small experiences that shaped mortal life. Unlike the gods, humans did not have endless time. Every day mattered because every day was limited. Perhaps this was one of the greatest differences between Olympus and the earth. The gods lived without fear of endings. Their lives stretched endlessly before them. Mortals, however, understood that moments were precious precisely because they could not last forever. A single harvest, a shared meal, or a conversation beside a fire could become a treasured memory. Pandora began to understand these things. She learned that humanity was not defined only by struggle. Although mortals faced hardship, they also created beauty. They made music from simple instruments. They painted stories onto pottery. They built homes where families could gather. They found reasons to celebrate even when life was uncertain. The world she entered was imperfect, but it was full of meaning. Yet beside all of these discoveries sat one unanswered mystery. The jar remained. It rested quietly, unchanged by the passing days. It did not move or make a sound. It offered no clue about what it contained. It simply existed, sealed and silent. At first, Pandora accepted it without question. She had been given a command by the gods, and she respected it. The instruction was clear. The jar was not to be opened. There was no reason to challenge it. But curiosity does not always appear as a sudden desire. Sometimes it begins as a small thought, a passing question, a moment of wondering what was inside. The thought may have appeared briefly at first, only to disappear as quickly as it came. But each time Pandora noticed the jar, the question returned. Why had the gods given it to her? Why had Zeus been so specific about keeping it closed? If the contents were harmless, why hide them? If they were valuable, why not explain their importance? The absence of answers made the mystery stronger. This was the challenge built into the jar itself. The danger was not only what was inside, but the uncertainty surrounding it. The unknown has always held a powerful attraction for those who seek understanding. Throughout human history, curiosity has been the beginning of discovery. It has led people across oceans, into unexplored lands, and toward questions about the universe itself. Without curiosity, humanity would never have learned or grown. But curiosity also requires wisdom. A person may discover something simply because they can, without understanding whether they should. Knowledge can illuminate the world, but it can also reveal things that cannot be forgotten. Pandora stood at the beginning of this timeless dilemma. She possessed the intelligence and awareness the gods had given her, but she was still new to the world. She had not yet experienced the consequences of every choice. She was learning, just as all humans learn, through uncertainty and discovery. The jar became a quiet companion in her life. Perhaps she passed by it many times without thinking. Perhaps she wondered about it only during moments of silence. Perhaps she told herself that the mystery could remain unanswered forever. But the longer something remains hidden, the more difficult it becomes to ignore. The ancient Greeks understood this deeply. Their myths often explored the tension between knowledge and restraint. Heroes searched for forbidden truths. Travelers crossed dangerous seas seeking answers. Mortals reached toward things beyond their understanding. Pandora's struggle was not unique. It was a reflection of a question faced by every generation. Is it better to know, even when the truth may bring pain? Or is some knowledge better left undiscovered? Above the earth, Zeus waited. The king of the gods had placed the choice in Pandora's hands. He did not force her to open the jar. He did not remove her ability to decide. The power of the plan came from the fact that the decision belonged to her. And that decision became more difficult with every passing day. The sealed jar stood as a reminder of something unfinished. It represented a mystery without an answer, a story without an ending. Pandora had been given many gifts by the gods: beauty, wisdom, curiosity. Now, she would discover that even the greatest gifts can carry unexpected consequences. The moment of choice was approaching, and soon, the quiet question that had followed her since arriving among mortals would become impossible to ignore. The moment Pandora had wondered about for so long arrived quietly. There was no thunder across the heavens, no warning from the gods, no sudden sign that the world was about to change forever. It was simply a moment, A quiet moment in an ordinary day. The jar remained where it had always been, waiting patiently. For many days, perhaps many weeks, Pandora had managed to ignore the mystery it carried. She had lived beside it, walked past it, and reminded herself of the command she had been given. Do not open it. But the human heart has always struggled with unanswered questions. The unknown has a way of drawing attention. A hidden path through a forest, a locked door in an empty room, a message written in a language no one understands, all create a desire to discover what lies beyond. The jar was no different. Pandora had been given the ability to think and question. She had been created with curiosity among her many gifts. These qualities made her remarkable, but they also placed her in a difficult position. The very thing that allowed humanity to grow was also the thing that could lead it into danger. The ancient storytellers did not describe Pandora as someone who wished to cause harm. She was not filled with anger or a desire to challenge the gods. She was not trying to bring suffering into the world. She simply wanted to know. And so, on that fateful day, Pandora approached the jar. Perhaps she hesitated. Perhaps her hand rested above the lid for a long moment as she remembered Zeus's warning. Perhaps she considered walking away and allowing the mystery to remain unsolved. But curiosity had become stronger than uncertainty. Slowly, she lifted the lid. At first, nothing happened. The world remained silent. The air did not change. The earth did not shake. There was no immediate sign that anything had gone wrong. Then, from within the jar, something began to move. The peaceful silence was broken. From the darkness inside the vessel came a rushing sound, like a breath that had been trapped for ages and was finally released. The things hidden within the jar burst outward, escaping into the world with incredible speed. Pandora stepped back in shock. The contents were not treasures. They were not gifts. They were the very things Zeus had intended humanity to experience. The ancient Greeks imagined these forces as spirits or personifications of suffering. They were invisible burdens that would now become part of human existence. They spread across the earth, entering the lives of mortals everywhere. The world Pandora had known was changed in a single instant. Before this moment, humans had already faced challenges. They knew hunger, cold, and difficulty. Life had never been completely effortless. But the troubles released from the jar represented something different. They symbolized the countless hardships that would follow humanity throughout history. Sickness entered the world. No longer would every person be guaranteed health. Bodies could weaken, injuries could become serious, and diseases could appear without warning. Old age followed. The passage of time, once simply a natural rhythm, became something humans would fear. Youth would fade. Strength would decline. Every life would eventually move toward its final days. Suffering, grief, and sorrow spread as well. Humans would experience the pain of losing loved ones, the disappointment of broken hopes, and the emotional wounds that come from living in an uncertain world. Other troubles escaped too: envy, conflict, hardship, and despair. Each represented a different struggle that would shape the human experience. The jar, once quiet and ordinary, had become the source of a new reality. Pandora realized what had happened. The command she had been given suddenly made sense, but only after it was too late. The mystery she had wanted to understand had revealed itself in the most devastating way possible. She reached toward the jar and quickly closed the lid. But the damage had already been done. The spirits had escaped. They were no longer contained within the vessel. They had entered the world of humanity and would remain there. The moment passed. The room became quiet again. But it was not the same quiet as before. something had changed. The world outside continued moving. The sun still crossed the sky. Rivers still flowed. The seasons still turned. Yet beneath all of it existed a new reality. Human life would now include struggles that could not be avoided. For the first time, people would fully understand hardship. But the story of Pandora does not end with what escaped. Because according to the myth, something remained inside the jar. Something that had not yet left. Something that would become one of the most important parts of the entire tale. As Pandora stood beside the sealed vessel, realizing the consequences of her choice, one final mystery remained hidden within. The jar still held something. And that final thing would determine whether humanity's story became one of endless suffering or something more complicated. For even in the darkest moments, the Greeks believed that something precious could remain. When the lid of Pandora's jar opened, the world was changed in ways no one could undo. The forces that escaped were not creatures with bodies or voices. They were invisible influences that would become woven into the human experience. The ancient Greeks imagined them as spirits, each carrying a different form of hardship that would follow humanity throughout its existence. Before this moment, life had already required effort. Humans had known hunger, cold, and the challenges of survival. They had worked to build shelters, find food, and protect their communities. But the troubles released from the jar represented something deeper, the struggles that would touch every generation, regardless of wealth, power, or status. The first among these was sickness. Disease was one of the greatest fears of the ancient world. Without modern medicine, a simple illness could change the course of an entire family. A wound that seemed small could become dangerous. A sickness that arrived suddenly could spread through villages and leave communities struggling. To the Greeks, illness was not only a physical experience. It was a reminder of human vulnerability. No matter how skilled, wealthy, or powerful someone became, they remained connected to a fragile body that could weaken without warning. From the jar came another unavoidable part of existence: old age. The Greeks understood time as a powerful force that even the gods could not always ignore. For mortals, aging was the clearest reminder that human life had limits. Strength slowly faded. The body changed. The energy of youth gave way to wisdom and experience. Yet old age was not viewed only as a punishment. It was also part of the natural rhythm of life. Elders carried memories, traditions, and knowledge passed down through generations. The same passage of time that brought weakness also created understanding. This complexity appeared throughout Greek mythology. Many of the things released from Pandora's jar were painful, but they were also connected to the deeper realities of being human. Grief was another spirit that entered the world. Before loss, people could experience love without knowing its greatest sorrow. But once humans formed deep connections with one another, they also became capable of mourning. The pain of losing family, friends, and those who mattered most became one of the strongest emotions humans would ever face. The Greeks understood grief well. Their stories were filled with heroes who experienced devastating losses and ordinary people who carried memories of those they loved. They recognized that sorrow was the shadow that followed meaningful relationships. Where there is love, there is the possibility of loss. The jar also released hardship and struggle. Life would no longer be defined only by opportunity. Humans would need to work for what they had. Fields would require tending. Homes would require building. Survival would demand patience and persistence. In some Greek traditions, labor itself became connected to the consequences of Pandora's arrival. Work was not portrayed simply as a punishment, but as an essential part of human existence. Through effort, people developed skills, created communities, and found purpose. Other troubles followed as well. Envy entered the world, bringing comparison and dissatisfaction. Humans would look at what others possessed and wonder why they did not have the same. This feeling could inspire ambition and improvement, but it could also create resentment and conflict. Anger and violence spread, reminding humanity that disagreements could become destructive. Fear and despair followed, representing the moments when people questioned whether they could overcome the difficulties placed before them. Each spirit reflected a different challenge. Together, they created a world far more complicated than the one that existed before. Yet the ancient Greeks did not see these struggles as proof that life was meaningless. Instead, myths often suggested that hardship was part of the human condition. Challenges shaped people. Difficult experiences created courage, compassion, and wisdom. A world without difficulty might have been peaceful, but it might also have lacked many of the qualities that made humanity extraordinary. The story of Pandora was therefore not simply a tale about punishment. It was a reflection on why life contains both joy and suffering. It explored the uncomfortable truth that the same world capable of producing love, creativity, and beauty is also capable of producing pain. As the spirits escaped, Pandora watched helplessly. The consequences of her choice moved beyond her control. The jar had been opened for only a moment, but that moment had changed the future of every person who would come after her. She reached for the lid and closed it once again. The room became still. The troubles had escaped. But something else remained behind. Something hidden. Something that had not yet entered the world. As Pandora stood beside the sealed jar, surrounded by the consequences of what had happened, the final mystery waited quietly inside. And that final presence would become the most debated and meaningful part of the entire myth. Because among all the things humanity had lost, something precious had not escaped. Something remained. For a moment, Pandora stood frozen. The jar that had once represented only mystery and curiosity now carried an entirely different meaning. The quiet object that had sat unnoticed in her home had become the source of a change that could never be reversed. The world outside would never be exactly the same again. Pandora looked upon the empty space where the spirits had escaped and finally understood the importance of Zeus's warning. The command she had once questioned now seemed clear. The gods had known what rested inside the vessel, and they had known what would happen if it was opened. But understanding the danger after the choice has been made is one of the oldest tragedies in human stories. There was no way to return to the moment before. No way to gather the escaping spirits and place them back inside. No way to pretend the lid had never been lifted. Pandora reached toward the jar and closed it as quickly as she could. The movement was desperate, almost instinctive. It was the action of someone who wanted to undo what had happened, someone who wished that a single motion could restore the world to the way it had been. But the jar was too late. The troubles had already escaped. They had spread beyond her reach, carried into the world where humans would now encounter them for generations to come. The silence that followed felt different. Before, the quiet around the jar had been filled with possibility. It was the silence of something unknown, something waiting to be discovered. Now, it was the silence that followed a moment of realization. Pandora had learned the answer to her question, but the answer came with a terrible cost. The ancient Greeks often explored this idea in their myths, that knowledge itself was not always simple. Discovering the truth could bring understanding, but it could also bring sorrow. Some discoveries could not be forgotten once they were made. Pandora's experience reflected this difficult reality. She had not opened the jar out of hatred or a desire to harm anyone. She had not understood the full consequences of her choice. She had simply wanted to know what had been hidden from her. In that way, Pandora represented something deeply human. Every person has moments of curiosity. Every person wonders about things they do not understand. Every person faces choices without knowing exactly where those choices will lead. The myth suggests that mistakes are often born not from cruelty, but from uncertainty. After the jar was closed, Pandora was left to face what had happened. The world around her remained familiar, but it had changed in an invisible way. The troubles released from the jar could not be seen, yet they would shape every life that followed. People would experience illness and loss. They would face disappointment and hardship. They would encounter conflict, fear, and moments of despair. The perfect world that humanity might have imagined was gone. Yet the story does not portray Pandora only as a figure of blame. Over time, many interpretations of the myth have viewed her with more sympathy. She was created by the gods, placed into a situation she did not fully understand, and given a choice without being told the consequences. Her mistake became a symbol of human imperfection, but also of the challenges that come with being human. After all, a world without mistakes would also be a world without learning. A world without uncertainty would leave no room for discovery. A world without difficulty would never reveal courage, compassion, or perseverance. The ancient Greeks understood that life was not defined only by what happened to people, but also by how they responded. And so Pandora's story continued. The jar was closed. The spirits were gone. The world had changed. But there was still one detail that remained unknown. When everything else rushed out of the vessel, something had stayed behind. Something had not escaped into the world with the others. Pandora had closed the lid quickly, but not before the jar had emptied itself of nearly everything it contained. Nearly everything. Inside remained one final presence. One final gift. The Greeks called it Olympus. For generations, scholars and storytellers would debate what this meant. Was hope left behind because humanity needed it? Was it a reward given to balance the suffering that had escaped? Or was it another mystery, just as complicated as the jar itself? Whatever the interpretation, the survival of hope changed the meaning of the story. Pandora's mistake did not become the end of humanity. The troubles of the world were real, but they would not have the final word. Because even after sickness, grief, and hardship entered human existence, something remained that allowed people to continue forward. The lid was closed. The damage was done. But the story was not finished. For hidden inside that small, mysterious jar was the one thing that would allow humanity to endure everything that had been released. When Pandora closed the lid of the jar, the world had already changed. The troubles that had escaped could not be called back. They had scattered into human existence, becoming part of the daily reality of every generation that followed. Life would now include pain alongside pleasure, loss alongside love, and uncertainty alongside moments of happiness. Yet the ancient story does not end with suffering, because something remained. Hidden inside the jar was one final presence. The Greeks called it Olympus. Among all the things released into the world, hope was the one that stayed behind. This small detail has made Pandora's story one of the most debated myths of ancient Greece. At first glance, it may seem strange. If hope is a blessing, why would it remain trapped inside the jar while suffering escaped? The answer has never been completely clear, and perhaps that is exactly why the story has survived for so long. Myths often do not provide simple explanations. Instead, they invite reflection. They leave room for different generations to find their own meaning within the story. The mystery of hope allows Pandora's tale to become something more than a warning about curiosity. It becomes a meditation on how humanity survives difficulty. One interpretation suggests that hope remained inside the jar because it was meant to be preserved for humanity. The troubles of the world had been released, but humans would not be left completely alone. Whenever they faced hardship, they would carry within themselves the ability to imagine something better. Hope would become the force that encouraged people to continue through difficult moments. A person facing illness could hope for healing. A traveler facing a difficult journey could hope to reach their destination. A family experiencing loss could hope to find peace again. Hope did not remove suffering, but it changed how people endured it. Another interpretation sees the story in a more complicated way. Perhaps hope remained inside the jar because humans could not access it in the same way they accessed the other experiences of life. Some ancient writers questioned whether hope was truly a blessing or whether it sometimes encouraged people to wait for a future that might never arrive. This uncertainty reflects the complexity of the human experience. Hope can inspire great achievements. It can motivate people to rebuild after destruction, continue after failure, and search for solutions to impossible problems. But hope can also create difficult expectations. People may hold onto possibilities that never come. They may dream of change while avoiding the actions needed to create it. Like many gifts in Greek mythology, hope carries both light and shadow. This complexity is what makes Pandora's story so powerful. The gods gave humanity many things, both wonderful and difficult. They gave people intelligence and curiosity, but curiosity led Pandora to the jar. They gave people emotions and connections, but those connections made loss possible. They gave people the ability to dream, and that dream became hope. Every gift carried a responsibility. Every blessing carried a challenge. For Pandora herself, the discovery of hope may have offered some comfort. After witnessing the consequences of her choice, knowing that something good remained would have changed the meaning of what happened. The world was no longer a place defined only by suffering. There was still a reason to move forward. There was still the possibility of better days. This idea became one of the most enduring lessons of the myth. Humans may not be able to avoid every hardship. They may not be able to control every event that shapes their lives. But they possess something powerful, the ability to believe that tomorrow can be different from today. This belief has shaped human history. Civilizations have rebuilt after disasters. Explorers have crossed unknown oceans. Artists have created beauty during difficult times. Ordinary people have continued caring for one another even when circumstances seemed overwhelming. Again and again, humanity has demonstrated the spirit represented by Olympus, the hope that remains. As centuries passed, the story of Pandora's jar continued to evolve. Some remembered it as a warning against disobedience. Others saw it as a reflection on the consequences of knowledge. Many found within it a deeper message about the balance between suffering and perseverance. But perhaps the most lasting interpretation is the simplest. Life is difficult. Pain exists. Loss is unavoidable. Yet people continue. They continue because something within them believes that the future can still hold something meaningful. They continue because even in the presence of hardship, they search for connection, beauty, and purpose. That is the role of hope. It does not erase the troubles of the world. It gives people the strength to face them. And so, the story of Pandora's jar ends not with the escape of suffering, but with the quiet survival of something far more powerful. A small, unseen gift remained behind. A gift that would follow humanity through every age. While Pandora's story unfolded among mortals, another part of Zeus's punishment continued high above the earth. Prometheus, the titan who had given humanity the gift of fire, had not escaped the anger of Olympus. His act of compassion had changed the lives of countless people, but to Zeus, it represented a challenge to divine authority. The punishment waiting for Prometheus was severe. Far away from the cities and villages of humanity, the Titan was taken to a lonely mountain. There, he was bound in chains and left exposed to the elements. The winds moved across the empty landscape, the days passed slowly beneath the sun, and the nights stretched endlessly beneath the stars. It was a place of isolation. Yet Prometheus remained unbroken. The ancient Greeks admired Prometheus not because he was powerful like Zeus, but because he endured suffering for the sake of others. He had known the consequences before stealing the fire. He understood that his choice would anger the gods, but he believed the benefit to humanity was worth the cost. His punishment became a symbol of sacrifice. Prometheus had looked upon a vulnerable world and decided that mortals deserved the chance to improve their lives. He had given them something that could transform their future, even though he knew it would transform his own. Each day, according to the myth, an eagle sent by Zeus came to Prometheus. The bird would tear at his body, causing terrible pain. But because Prometheus was immortal, his wounds would heal, allowing the suffering to begin again the next day. It was a punishment without an ending. A mortal might eventually escape through death, but Prometheus was denied even that release. Time itself became part of his torment. The seasons changed around him. The world continued moving below. Humans continued using the fire he had given them, building homes, creating tools, and developing new ways of living. The very civilization that represented his greatest achievement continued to grow while he remained trapped. Yet Prometheus did not regret his choice. In Greek mythology, this quality made him different from many other figures who challenged the gods. His defiance was not motivated by a desire for wealth, power, or personal glory. He did not steal fire so that he could rule over humanity. He did it because he believed knowledge and opportunity should not belong only to the powerful. This idea made Prometheus a complicated figure. To Zeus, he was a rebellious titan who had broken the order of the universe. To humans, he became a benefactor, a figure who suffered so that others could flourish. Both perspectives existed within the myth. The story of Prometheus raises a question that has continued to be explored for centuries. When someone breaks a rule for the sake of helping others, is the act still wrong? The ancient Greeks did not provide an easy answer. They understood that order mattered. The gods represented structure and stability. Without boundaries, the world could descend into chaos. But they also recognized the importance of courage, compassion, and the desire to improve life. Prometheus existed in the space between these ideas. He was both a challenger of authority and a protector of humanity. While he suffered on the mountain, the consequences of his actions continued spreading across the earth. Fire remained in human hands. People continued learning and creating. The gift that Zeus had wanted to restrict had already become part of civilization itself. The king of the gods could punish Prometheus, but he could not remove what humanity had learned. Knowledge, once given, could not easily be taken away. This was perhaps the greatest lesson of Prometheus's story. A physical object could be stolen or destroyed, A flame could be extinguished, but an idea could survive. Humanity carried the memory of fire forward. They carried the ability to create. They carried the possibility of progress. And although Zeus had attempted to remind mortals of their limitations, humans continued moving toward a future shaped by their own choices. The connection between Prometheus and Pandora became clear. Both stories centered around gifts that changed humanity forever. Fire represented knowledge and advancement. Pandora's jar represented the arrival of suffering and uncertainty. Together, they explained the ancient Greek understanding of human existence. Life was not a perfect paradise that was lost because of one mistake. It was a mixture of blessings and burdens. Humans possessed the ability to create, but they also faced hardship. They gained knowledge, but they also discovered consequences. They received opportunities, but they had to decide how to use them. Prometheus's suffering would continue for many years, but the story of his punishment was not the end. Eventually, even Zeus's anger would soften. Even the greatest conflicts among the gods could change with time. And when Prometheus's long imprisonment finally came to an end, it would reveal another important lesson hidden within the myth. Even those who challenge the greatest powers in the world may eventually find freedom. The years passed slowly for Prometheus. Bound to the mountainside, separated from the world he had helped transform, the Titan endured a punishment designed to outlast memory itself. Each day brought the same endless cycle of suffering, and each night brought only a brief pause before the torment began again. Yet Prometheus remained patient. He had always been a figure defined by foresight. He understood that every choice carried consequences, and he had accepted those consequences before ever reaching toward the sacred flame of Olympus. His punishment was painful, but it did not convince him that his decision had been wrong. The fire still burned among humans. That was what mattered. Far below the mountain where he was imprisoned, humanity continued to change. The gift Prometheus had given them became the foundation for new discoveries. People learned to shape their surroundings, develop new skills, and create things that would have once seemed impossible. The world was moving forward, and although Prometheus could not witness every achievement, he understood that the spark he had offered had become something much larger than himself. The story of Prometheus became a reminder that progress often comes with sacrifice. Those who introduce new ideas, challenge existing limits, or question established rules sometimes face resistance before they are understood. The benefits of their actions may not be recognized immediately, but ideas have a way of surviving. The same qualities that made Prometheus a threat to Zeus also made him valuable to humanity. His intelligence, curiosity, and willingness to question authority were the very traits that allowed him to see possibilities others ignored. Eventually, the endless conflict between Prometheus and Zeus began to change. The ancient myths tell different versions of how this happened. In some traditions, Zeus's anger slowly faded with time. In others, the Titan's release was connected to the hero Heracles, known in Roman tradition as Hercules. During one of his great adventures, Heracles traveled through the world, completing the impossible tasks assigned to him. Along his journey, he discovered Prometheus suffering upon the mountain. Seeing the Titan's torment, Heracles chose to intervene. With his incredible strength, he defeated the eagle that had carried out Zeus's punishment and broke the chains that had held Prometheus captive for so long. The Titan was finally freed from his endless suffering. The rescue represented more than physical freedom. It represented the possibility of reconciliation. The relationship between Zeus and Prometheus had been defined by conflict. One represented authority and order, The other represented knowledge and change. Their struggle reflected a tension found throughout human history, the balance between preserving what already exists and creating something new. But the myth suggests that these opposing forces do not always need to remain enemies forever. Even Zeus, the most powerful of the gods, eventually recognized something important about Prometheus. The Titan's actions had caused disruption, but they had also brought humanity a gift that shaped the future. The fire could not be taken back. The knowledge could not be erased. The world had changed. Prometheus's story therefore became one not only of punishment but also of endurance. His suffering demonstrated the cost of challenging power, but his survival demonstrated the strength of conviction. He had been bound, but he had not been defeated. This idea made Prometheus one of the most enduring figures in Greek mythology. Unlike many heroes who achieved glory through battles and victories, Prometheus's greatest act was a quiet one. He gave something away. He sacrificed himself so that others could have more. The contrast between Prometheus and Pandora also became increasingly clear. Prometheus represented the consequences of giving humanity too much freedom. He gave humans fire, knowledge, and the ability to shape their own future. Pandora represented the consequences that came with that future. Through her, humanity received the struggles that would accompany existence itself. Together, their stories explained why human life contained both achievement and hardship. The ancient Greeks understood that civilization was never created without difficulty. Every discovery carried risks. Every new ability created new responsibilities. Every advancement changed the world in ways that could not always be predicted. Prometheus's gift allowed humanity to rise. Pandora's jar reminded them that rising came with challenges. Neither story stood alone. They were two parts of the same reflection on what it meant to be human. Eventually, Prometheus stepped away from the mountain that had held him for so long. The chains were gone. The eagle was gone. The endless punishment had ended. But the meaning of his sacrifice remained. Long after the names of individual kings and warriors faded, the story of Prometheus continued to be told. He became a symbol of curiosity, generosity, and the courage to help others even when the consequences were uncertain. His fire was never just a flame. It was the beginning of possibility. And the world he helped create would continue carrying both the light he gave and the challenges that followed. The story of Pandora's jar has survived for thousands of years because it speaks to questions that remain familiar even in the modern world. At first glance, it appears to be a simple tale about curiosity and consequences. A woman opens a mysterious container, troubles escape into the world, and humanity must live with the results. But beneath this surface is a much deeper exploration of what it means to be human. The myth is not only about Pandora, it is about all of us. Every generation has faced uncertainty. Every person has encountered moments when a choice had to be made without knowing exactly what would happen next. The story of Pandora reflects this universal experience, the challenge of living in a world where knowledge is incomplete and consequences are often impossible to predict. This is why Pandora has remained such a fascinating figure. She represents curiosity. Curiosity is one of humanity's greatest strengths. Without curiosity, humanity would remain stagnant. But the myth also recognizes the risks that come with seeking answers. Not every discovery brings comfort. Some knowledge creates new responsibilities. Some truths change the way people see the world forever. Pandora's mistake was not that she wanted to understand. Her mistake was that she did not understand what she was about to discover. This distinction is important. The ancient Greeks often portrayed their mythological figures as complex rather than simply good or evil. Pandora was not created as a villain. She was a person placed in an impossible situation, given intelligence and curiosity but not the full knowledge needed to understand the consequences of her actions. In this way, she became a reflection of humanity itself. People make choices with limited information. They learn through experience. They sometimes discover that even well-intentioned decisions can have unexpected results. The myth also explores the relationship between humans and the gods. In Greek mythology, the gods were powerful, but they were not always perfect. They could be generous, but they could also be proud. They could offer blessings, but they could also act out of anger or fear. Zeus's response to Prometheus reveals this complexity. From one perspective, Zeus was protecting the order of the universe. He believed that certain boundaries existed for a reason and that mortals should not possess everything belonging to the divine. From another perspective, his punishment was severe. Prometheus had acted out of compassion, giving humanity the ability to improve their lives. The conflict between them represented a larger question. Should knowledge and progress be controlled, or should they be shared? This question has appeared throughout human history. New inventions, discoveries, and ideas have often created both excitement and concern. Every advancement carries possibilities and risks. Like fire itself, knowledge can provide warmth and progress, but it must be handled carefully. This connection between fire and Pandora's jar reveals the larger theme of the myth. Human existence is a balance between gifts and burdens. Prometheus gave humanity fire, representing creativity, intelligence, and advancement. Pandora brought the hardships that would accompany that advancement. Together, their stories explain why life contains both extraordinary achievements and unavoidable struggles. The ancient Greeks understood that suffering was not the absence of meaning. In fact, difficulty often revealed the qualities that made humans remarkable. Courage exists because there is fear. Compassion exists because there is suffering. Perseverance exists because there are challenges to overcome. Without hardship, many of the traits people admire most might never have developed. This is where the importance of hope becomes clear. The final gift remaining inside Pandora's jar changed the entire meaning of the story. If the myth had ended with suffering alone, it would have been a story of despair. But hope remained. Humanity would face sickness, loss, uncertainty, and hardship, but people would also possess the ability to believe in better days. Hope became the force that allowed humanity to continue. It encouraged people to rebuild after destruction, to search for solutions after failure, and to find meaning even during difficult times. The Greeks did not imagine hope as a guarantee that everything would become easy. Instead, hope was the strength to continue despite difficulty. That idea made Pandora's story timeless. The world is not perfect. Mistakes happen. Unexpected challenges appear. People sometimes discover that the choices they make have consequences they never imagined. But humanity continues. People create, love, explore, and dream because something inside them believes that the future can still hold something worthwhile. This may be the greatest lesson hidden within the myth. The story of Pandora's jar is not simply about the moment when trouble entered the world. It is about what happened afterward. It is about how people respond when life becomes difficult. It is about finding possibility in uncertainty. It is about carrying hope even when the world feels overwhelming. And so, the tale of Pandora remains not as a warning alone, but as a reflection of the human journey itself. A journey filled with curiosity and consequence. with struggle and discovery, with darkness and light, and above all, with the quiet belief that even after the greatest challenges, something hopeful can remain. Long after the ancient Greeks first told the story of Pandora's jar, the myth continued to travel across generations. Like many of the greatest legends of antiquity, Pandora's story changed as it moved through different cultures and time periods. Each era looked upon the myth through its own experiences, finding new meanings in the choices of Pandora, the punishment of Prometheus, and the mysterious gift of hope. The story survived because it addressed something timeless. Human beings have always wondered why suffering exists. Why do people experience loss? Why does hardship appear even when someone has done nothing to deserve it? Why are joy and sorrow so often connected? The myth of Pandora offered one ancient answer to these questions. It suggested that suffering was not simply an accident, but part of the complicated nature of existence itself. In the earliest Greek traditions, Pandora's story carried a warning. It reminded listeners that actions had consequences and that humans needed humility when approaching forces beyond their understanding. The gods possessed knowledge that mortals did not. The unknown could be dangerous, and curiosity, while powerful, required wisdom. However, as centuries passed, interpretations of Pandora began to change. Later storytellers and philosophers looked beyond the simple idea of punishment and began exploring the deeper themes within the myth. Pandora became less of a symbol of blame and more of a representation of humanity's relationship with uncertainty. She became a figure who reflected the struggles everyone experiences. The idea that Pandora alone was responsible for bringing suffering into the world became less important than the larger questions surrounding her story. Was she responsible for a choice she did not fully understand? Was Zeus's punishment justified? Was humanity meant to suffer, or was suffering simply part of the natural world? These questions allowed the myth to remain alive. Different generations found different answers. During the Renaissance, when European artists and writers returned to the stories of ancient Greece and Rome, Pandora became a subject of renewed interest. Artists explored her beauty, her curiosity, and the mysterious moment when she approached the jar. Some focused on the tragedy of her choice. Others focused on the beauty of her creation. The image of Pandora standing beside the sealed vessel became a powerful symbol of temptation, knowledge, and human curiosity. Over time, the phrase "opening Pandora's box" entered everyday language. Interestingly, the original Greek story referred to a jar, not a box. The change likely came through later translations and interpretations, but the meaning remained the same. The phrase came to describe a situation where one action releases unexpected problems that cannot easily be controlled. People began using the expression to describe everything from political decisions to scientific discoveries. A single choice, a chain of consequences, a problem that grows beyond what anyone expected. Even today, the phrase remains familiar because the idea behind it feels universal. Modern interpretations of Pandora have also become more sympathetic. Many writers and thinkers have questioned whether Pandora should truly be viewed as a source of evil. After all, she did not create the troubles inside the jar. She did not place them there. She did not know what would happen when she opened it. She was created by the gods and placed into a situation designed by forces far greater than herself. Because of this, some see Pandora not as a villain but as a symbol of humanity's innocence and vulnerability. She represents the moment when people first encounter the complexity of the world. She asks questions. She seeks answers. She makes mistakes. And she continues forward. In this way, Pandora becomes surprisingly relatable. Every person experiences moments when they wish they could undo a decision. Everyone has encountered situations where the outcome was different from what they expected. Everyone has faced the reality that some things cannot be changed once they happen. Yet life continues. That is where the enduring power of hope appears again. The final element of Pandora's story ensures that the myth is not only about regret. It is also about resilience. The troubles of the world may be unavoidable, but so is humanity's ability to respond. People continue creating, caring, rebuilding, and searching for meaning. The same curiosity that led Pandora to open the jar is the curiosity that allows humanity to grow. The same uncertainty that creates fear is the uncertainty that makes discovery possible. The same struggles that bring sorrow can also reveal strength. This balance is what has allowed Pandora's story to remain relevant for thousands of years. It is not a story about a perfect world ruined by one mistake. It is a story about an imperfect world and the people who must learn to live within it. From ancient Greece to the modern age, Pandora's jar has remained a reminder that every choice carries consequences, every gift carries responsibility, and every challenge requires courage. The jar may have been opened long ago in myth, but the questions it raises are still with us today. How do we respond when life becomes difficult? How do we balance curiosity with caution? How do we continue when the world does not unfold as we hoped? Thousands of years have passed since the story of Pandora was first told, yet the image of the mysterious jar remains one of the most recognizable symbols from ancient mythology. A simple vessel, a single choice, a world forever changed. The story has endured because it captures something deeply familiar about the human experience. Every person knows what it means to face uncertainty. Pandora's story continues because it is not only about the past. It is about us. The ancient Greeks used myths to explore questions that had no easy answers. Why do people suffer? Why do people make mistakes? Why do people continue even when life becomes difficult? Pandora's jar became one of their most powerful attempts to answer these questions. At its heart, the myth suggests that humanity was never meant to live in a world without challenges. Hardship is not simply an interruption of life. It is part of life itself. The troubles released from the jar represent the realities every generation must face. Illness, grief, fear, disappointment, and uncertainty have existed throughout human history. No civilization has escaped them. No individual has avoided them completely. But the Greeks did not tell this story to suggest that humanity was doomed. They included hope. That final detail changed everything. Without hope, Pandora's story would have been a tale of loss alone. It would have suggested that humanity's greatest mistake was also its final defeat. But the presence of Olympus transformed the meaning of the myth. The world could be difficult, but it was still worth living in. People could experience sorrow, but they could also experience joy. They could lose, but they could also rebuild. Hope became the quiet force that allowed humanity to endure. It was not a promise that every problem would disappear. It was not a guarantee of an easy future. Instead, hope represented the strength to continue despite uncertainty. This idea has remained powerful because it reflects a truth that people across every era have understood. Life is unpredictable. The future is unknown. But people continue moving forward. The story of Pandora also reminds us that gifts are rarely simple. The things that shape humanity often come with both advantages and responsibilities. Fire allowed humans to create, but it also introduced new dangers. Knowledge allowed humans to understand the world, but it also revealed difficult truths. Curiosity allowed humans to discover new possibilities, but it also led Pandora toward the forbidden jar. The myth does not present these qualities as purely good or bad. Instead, it shows that power requires wisdom. Every advancement creates new choices. Every discovery creates new questions. Every opportunity carries responsibility. This was the lesson hidden in the conflict between Zeus and Prometheus. The gods feared what humanity might do with greater power, while Prometheus believed humans deserved the opportunity to grow. Their disagreement reflected a question that still exists today. How much knowledge should people seek? How much power should people pursue? And how should those gifts be used? The ancient Greeks understood that progress was never without risk. The same qualities that allow humanity to achieve greatness can also create challenges. But they also believed that struggle could reveal the best parts of human nature. Compassion exists because people experience suffering. Courage exists because people experience fear. Determination exists because people face obstacles. Hope exists because the world is imperfect. In this way, Pandora's story became more than a warning. It became a story about resilience. Pandora herself changed over time in the way people understood her. Once viewed primarily as the source of humanity's troubles, she became a more complex figure. She represented curiosity, innocence, uncertainty, and the difficult process of learning. She was not simply the person who opened the jar. She was the person who discovered what it meant to live in a complicated world. Her story reflected the journey of humanity itself. People begin life without knowing everything. They make choices. They experience consequences. They learn. They continue. The jar remains one of mythology's greatest symbols because it represents the unknown possibilities that surround every decision. It reminds us that we cannot always predict the outcome of our actions. But it also reminds us that mistakes do not define the entire story. What matters is what comes afterward, how we respond, how we adapt, how we find meaning. The final image of Pandora's myth is not one of destruction. It is not the escaping troubles or the closed lid of the jar. It is the presence of hope, a small, unseen gift remaining in the darkness. A reminder that even when the world changes in unexpected ways, something valuable can still remain. And perhaps that is why the story has lasted for so long. Because every generation faces its own version of Pandora's jar. Every generation encounters uncertainty. Every generation discovers challenges it did not expect. But every generation also carries the same gift: the ability to hope, the ability to begin again, the ability to look toward the future and believe that something better may still be waiting. And so, the legend of Pandora's jar continues, not as a story about the moment humanity lost perfection, but as a story about the moment humanity began learning how to live. With curiosity, with courage, with wisdom, and always with hope. As the story of Pandora's jar comes to an end, the image that remains is not simply one of a woman opening a forbidden vessel. It is the image of humanity standing at the beginning of its own journey. A journey filled with uncertainty. A journey shaped by choices. A journey where every discovery brings both opportunity and responsibility. The ancient Greeks did not create myths only to explain how the world began. They created them to explore the questions that followed humanity throughout every age. The story of Pandora was one of their reflections on why life contains both beauty and difficulty, why people make mistakes, and why they continue even when the path ahead is unclear. Pandora entered the world as a creation of the gods, carrying gifts that made her extraordinary. She possessed beauty, intelligence, curiosity, and the ability to experience life in a way unlike anyone before her. But she also carried something deeply human, the desire to understand. Her curiosity led her toward the jar, and that moment changed everything. The troubles hidden inside escaped into the world, becoming symbols of the hardships that would follow humanity forever. Sickness, plus fear, struggle, the challenges that no person can completely avoid. Yet the myth does not ask us to see Pandora only as the source of these difficulties. Her story is more complicated than that. She was not a villain seeking destruction. She was someone who faced a mystery, made a choice, and discovered that the consequences were greater than she imagined. In that way, Pandora became a reflection of humanity itself. People have always lived with uncertainty. They make decisions without knowing every outcome. They search for answers without knowing what those answers will reveal. They reach for new possibilities while accepting that every step forward carries risk. This is the nature of being human. The story of Prometheus adds another layer to this understanding. By giving fire to humanity, Prometheus offered a symbol of knowledge, creativity, and progress. He believed that people deserved the opportunity to shape their own future, even if that freedom came with challenges. His punishment showed the cost of challenging power, but his gift showed the power of sacrifice. Together, the stories of Prometheus and Pandora reveal a central idea of Greek mythology. Human life is defined by balance. People have the ability to create, but they must also face the consequences of creation. They have the desire to learn, but they must also accept that knowledge can be difficult. They have the freedom to choose, but they must also take responsibility for those choices. The world that followed Pandora's mistake was not a perfect world. But perhaps a perfect world was never the point. A world without struggle would also be a world without perseverance. A world without uncertainty would be a world without discovery. A world without hardship would be a world without many of the qualities that make humanity remarkable. The final gift left inside the jar, hope, became the key to understanding the entire myth. Hope did not erase the suffering that had entered the world. It did something more important. It gave humanity the ability to continue. Through every difficult moment, people have carried the same force that remained hidden within Pandora's jar. It is the belief that tomorrow can still be different. It is the courage to rebuild after loss. It is the determination to keep moving even when the future is unknown. Hope has guided explorers into unfamiliar places. It has inspired people to create during difficult times. It has helped communities recover after tragedy. It has allowed individuals to endure moments they once believed they could not overcome. That is why Pandora's story has survived for thousands of years. It is not merely a story about a mistake. It is a story about what happens after mistakes. It is about learning. It is about adapting. It is about discovering that even when life changes in unexpected ways, something meaningful can still remain. The jar has long been closed. The spirits have entered the world. The consequences cannot be undone. But humanity continues forward. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson hidden within the myth. We do not live because the world is without difficulty. We live because, despite difficulty, we continue to search for meaning. We continue to love. We continue to create. We continue to wonder. We continue to hope. And so, the legend of Pandora's jar remains with us, not as a tale of the end of innocence, but as a reminder of the strength found within the human spirit. A reminder that curiosity can lead us into the unknown. That wisdom can help us navigate what follows. And that even when the world feels filled with uncertainty, there is always something worth holding on to. Good night.